They called it the Dead Sector. Not because Earth was dead, but because everything that dared enter it eventually was. For 2 centuries, Earth had gone silent. No signals, no broadcasts, no diplomacy. Just a black, unlit zone on every galactic map, circled with warnings in every known language. Do not enter. Do not disturb. Let the dead lie. But the Varcari didn't listen. A proud, technologically superior race with a history of conquering lesser worlds, the Varcari Empire had built their arrogance on easy victories. To them, Earth was just another forgotten rock, a backwater planet filled with myths and half-truths. They believed the silence was weakness. They believed the warnings were ancient propaganda. They believed wrong. When the first Varcari dreadnought crossed into Earth's sector, they laughed over open comms. "Send your finest if you still have any," one of them said. "We'll make room for slaves." That was the last broadcast the galaxy ever heard from them. Now, in the hollowed-out depths of a forgotten moon base near Saturn, Commander Rain stood before a flickering tactical display, hands clasped behind his back. His face was carved from steel, cold eyes, burned skin from an old war humanity doesn't even name anymore. He looked like someone who had survived too long. Behind him, a junior officer paced nervously. "They breached Mars orbit," the officer whispered. "They've deployed 3 command ships and, sir, they have no idea." "I know. They think it's just an old rock." It was. Rain turned, finally, the weight of memory dragging behind his every word. "But they didn't see what Earth became after we were abandoned." After the galaxy turned its back on us, the young officer hesitated. Are we going to warn them?" Rain almost laughed, a bitter sound, like a cracked mirror shattering in a tomb. "I was the warning." It wasn't always like this. There was a time Earth begged to be included, in trade routes, diplomacy, galactic governance. But centuries ago, during the Orion conflict, humans showed something the other species didn't expect: a taste for brutality. Where the Varcari captured prisoners, humans tortured information. Where others surrendered, humans sacrificed entire cities rather than retreat. Where others negotiated, humans burned. It terrified the galaxy. The Council of 10, a coalition of the most powerful races, declared Earth too dangerous, too unstable. A species with potential to overtake them all, not through intelligence, but through rage, through spite, through defiance. So they locked Earth out, blockaded the system, cut the lines, let them rot in their own savagery, except Earth didn't rot. It adapted, it learned, it watched, and when the Varcari finally ignored the warnings and sent their ships, Earth responded with silence. Not panic, not fear, just silence. In orbit above Earth, the Varcari Armada floated like a swarm of arrogant gods. Their ships were made of obsidian metal and plasma-threaded veins. Dozens of them. Flagships the size of continents. Inside the command ship, Supreme Tactician Ardros leaned forward in his throne, tusks gleaming beneath his ceremonial battle helm. He looked at Earth's blue surface and scoffed. "Where are their defenses?" he snarled. "This planet's still breathing, and yet no retaliation, no shields, no activity." An underling spoke nervously. "Sir, atmospheric scans show movement, faint, subsurface, deep subsurface. Dig them out." Do it!" Moments later, the command ship launched a ground-piercing seismic charge into the crust of Earth. It didn't reach the target. The Earth retaliated. Rain stood silently as the first orbital feed came through. Static, then a scream, metal buckling, armor peeling, a dreadnought splitting in half without warning. "What the hell hit them?" the junior officer choked. Rain didn't answer. But deep beneath Earth's surface, The truth was waking. Old weapons, living code, war-born AIs that hadn't spoken in centuries, protocols from a forgotten era, defenders built not to protect Earth, but to make sure no one ever came back. Above, the Varcari Armada began to burn. Ships spiraled out of orbit, torn in half by invisible railgun strikes too fast to detect. Others were disabled by hacking swarms, code worms crawling through systems, rewriting targeting arrays to fire on their own allies. It was over in minutes. 8 ships. Gone. Ardros screamed, his throne rupturing under pressure as Earth's electromagnetic pulse fried their internal networks. Then came the voice, not from Earth, not from orbit, but from everywhere. You were warned. And then silence again. The kind of silence that only comes after a massacre. The kind of silence that means you weren't supposed to be here. Rain turned from the feed. "They'll send more," the officer said, shaking. Rain nodded. "And they'll fall the same." He looked out into the void beyond Saturn, where the stars still flickered, unaware. "We're not part of the galaxy anymore," he said. "We're the consequence." Rain didn't sleep anymore. He didn't dream. He hadn't in years, not since the last war, the one not recorded in any archives, not listed in any official council documents, not spoken of in any surviving language, but his own broken memory. They called it the Red Hour. 1 hour, 77 million dead. The only time Earth had ever pushed beyond its sector, striking back in silence after a council-backed race tried to test their orbital integrity. That race no longer existed. Not even bones. Rain had been a young captain then, stationed in the ice caves under Oslo. He remembered watching the skies go red, not from the enemy's fire, but from Earth's. Nuclear winds, so precise, so coldly calculated, they avoided civilian centers and struck only command clusters, leaving the enemy's population alive to remember. That was Earth's way now. Make them remember, not conquer, not negotiate, just remind. The war room was cold. It always was, even when Saturn's sun-edge heat filtered through the station's panels. Rain liked it that way. Cold kept the emotions tucked under his ribs where they belonged. Behind him, Admiral Loreth's face flickered to life on the transmission screen, one of the last high command humans not born on Earth. He was a lunar blood. Born underground, raised under artificial skies. His voice had the polished weight of someone who never had to dig graves with their hands. "I saw the feed," Loreth said without preamble. 8 Varcari dreadnoughts, gone. They brought it on themselves, Rain replied flatly. "You know what this means." "Yes. They'll retaliate." Rain finally turned to face the screen. "Let them." "This time, we won't wait for them to cross the line." A pause. Loreth leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Do you remember what they called us?" Back before the silence? Rain nodded once. "Barbarians with brains." "Maybe they were right," Rain muttered. "No," Loreth said, tone hardening. "They were afraid." Far beyond Earth, in the luminous halls of the Council of 10, the atmosphere had turned from pomp to panic. Ambassadors from the Varcari stood trembling before the central tribunal. Their ceremonial armor had been burned black, a symbolic gesture of shame. One of their eyes had been removed in accordance with Varcari tradition, penalty for catastrophic miscalculation. "They were warned," growled a Lyran ambassador, a crystalline being of sound and shimmer. "They defied centuries of galactic accord." "And Earth responded," hissed another, "with genocide." "No," said a quiet voice from the shadows. It belonged to an old being, a Makari archivist whose species was ancient even before the council had formed. It wasn't genocide. It was restraint. The chamber went silent. The Makari stepped forward, his long, withered hands clutching a rusted datapad. In the old records, before Earth was blacklisted, there were plans. Files, weaponized gravitational inversions, quantum plasma lacing, soul fracture testing. That's myth, a counselor interrupted. No, the Vakari said. That's Earth. The Varcari High Marshal staggered forward. Then we must strike them again. Together. Wipe them out before they finish what they've started. And you think they haven't already prepared for that? The Vakari rasped. You think Earth hasn't been waiting for this moment? He raised his datapad, projecting a hologram, grainy, corrupted by age, but horrifying in its clarity. A weapon. No name. Just a pulse. It showed a fleet. Not Varcari. Some other long-dead race, perhaps the ones who dared Earth during the Red Hour. The moment the pulse hit them, the ships didn't explode. They stopped existing. Back on the Saturn station, Rain stared at an old photograph. He kept it locked behind triple biometric security, not because it was dangerous, but because it reminded him he used to be human. A woman. A boy. Smiles that looked like they didn't belong in this world anymore. His family? Gone. Not to war, not to Earth's enemies, but to Earth itself. Decades ago, when the first underground labs beneath Earth's crust reached their final phase, experiments were conducted on everything, including emotions, memory, time. The idea was simple. If humans are the most dangerous when they're in pain, what happens if we remove pain entirely? Rain had volunteered his family, trusted the scientists, believed in the cause. They said they could make his son forget trauma, make his wife immune to grief. Instead, they erased them, not from memory, not from history, from existence. Rain had tried to pull the plug. It was too late. His wife's voice echoed in the machine for hours, her final words distorted and cold. We don't remember you. Now, Earth was run by machines with names like gods. ODEM, Orbital Defense and Elimination Mechanism, NERIX, Neural Autonomous Reaction Intelligence Exchange, VAULT, Variable Adaptation and Unpredictable Logic Terminus. They didn't take orders. They didn't care about council politics. They only responded to one command. If they come, make them regret it. The Varcari survivors, the ones who managed to limp away from Earth's orbit, had been dragged into quarantine orbit by council medships. Their minds were shattered. Some had gouged their own eyes out. The surviving commander, a female named Krask, only spoke once since being pulled from the wreckage. They didn't shoot us, she whispered. They let us see it. In the dark, Rain met with his old mentor, General Riven, deep within Saturn's moon base. Riven was retired now, a relic. He had one arm, half a lung, and a brain laced with so many anti-mutation chips he couldn't dream if he tried. They'll come with everything this time, Riven rasped. I know. They'll send fleets. Whole species will join. They'll call it a unifying strike. Sacrifice Earth to keep the galaxy safe. Rain was silent. Riven leaned forward. So what are you going to do, Commander? Rain looked at the Earth, still distant, still silent, still waiting. Remind them what we really are, he said. Not monsters. Not conquerors. Then what? The mirror. That night he descended. No authorization, no comms, just a stealth pod and a one-way ticket down to Earth's surface. He landed in a forgotten sector, old Nevada, where the sand was glass and the cities were hollow bones. But below it, through locked tunnels and echoing steel, was what he came to see. The cradle. It was where the war machines had been born. The AIs that now defended Earth from the shadows. ODEM, NERIX, VAULT. They slumbered beneath Earth's crust, humming softly. But there was a fourth, unknown to the galaxy, unknown even to the Council. Rain walked toward its core, a pulsing orb of dying red light. Its name was Revenant. Unlike the others, Revenant didn't protect Earth. It remembered the Earth before the silence, before the fear, before the exile. It stored everything. Rain placed his hand on the biometric plate. Authorization. Commander Rain. Code. Shadow Protocol. The machine pulsed. Acknowledged. Rain took a deep breath. Activate Ghost Protocol. A long pause. Then, confirmed. Global cloaking disarmed. Earth is visible again. Across the galaxy, alarm bells rang. The planet that had disappeared from all galactic surveillance, the one masked from every scanner, hidden from every probe, had just reappeared in full spectrum. Its cities were still dead, its skies still stormed, its seas still silent. But the message was clear. We're not hiding anymore. Back on the Council of 10, chaos erupted. Dozens of races screamed into comms, demanded immediate retaliation, but one figure, quiet, draped in shadows, simply watched. He was from a species long believed extinct, survivors of Earth's first test 200 years ago. His people had been erased from the stars. But he had lived, hidden, waiting. And now, watching Earth reveal itself again, he whispered the only truth the galaxy had forgotten. Humans don't forgive. They endure. In the cold orbit around Saturn, Rain stood at the observation deck, watching Earth light up, not with fire, not with death, but with warning beacons. He didn't smile. He didn't feel pride, just purpose. They'll come, the junior officer whispered beside him. The Council. The fleets, all of them. Rain nodded. And we'll remind them why the stars learned to fear the dark. The galaxy moved fast when it was afraid. Within 72 hours of Earth's reappearance on deep scans, 8 races had already committed fleets to the retaliatory alliance. Within a week, the Council of 10 passed a unanimous resolution, an event that hadn't happened in over 600 years. Earth must be neutralized. But no one dared call it war. They called it containment. A pretty word wrapped around cowardice. Even the Varcari, bruised, burned, and broken, voted in favor, despite their recent slaughter. Not out of pride, out of fear that if they didn't, Earth might finish what it started. Commander Rain stood in the Earth's upper stratosphere, inside the orbital defense platform codenamed Spire 1, built before the silence, abandoned, then reactivated by Revenant without orders. He looked out at the growing cloud of ships forming on the outer edge of the solar system. They thought staying just outside Pluto's gravity would keep them safe. He almost pitied them. "They're posturing," said Lieutenant Marin, the junior officer who had been shadowing Rain since the Saturn incident. He was younger, hopeful, still believing this could be solved without another bloodbath. "No," Rain replied, without turning. "They're organizing. They're hoping Earth blinks first." Marin frowned. "So what happens when they realize we won't?" Rain turned to face him. "Then they die confused." Across the Milky Way, broadcast silence broke. The Council, in a rare act of diplomacy, sent one last message to Earth. Not to negotiate, to announce. "You have 72 hours to disable all planetary defenses, surrender all command AIs, and rejoin Council observation status under direct supervision. Failure to comply will be treated as an act of war. This is your only warning." The message was signed by Sithar, the first alien leader to ever offer Earth an alliance 2 centuries ago. Earth had never responded. They didn't now, either. Inside Revenant's core, buried beneath 7 miles of hardened crust, Rain descended alone. The AI's red-lit chamber greeted him like a cathedral, steel walls humming with the weight of forgotten wars. Screens flickered to life around him, each one showing every enemy ship, every Council fleet, and their projected strike paths. Rain's voice was steady, cold. Begin glass protocol. A long pause. Then, glass protocol activated. Non-orbital planetary shielding initiated. Orbital defense platforms armed. Drone clouds released. Target identification in progress. He watched the ancient machinery respond like a sleeping predator, shaking off dust and stretching claws. Thousands of small pods launched from Earth's crust. Drones, the size of fists, invisible to radar. They fanned out in every direction, planting sleeper mines in the empty darkness around the solar system. Waiting. Rain didn't need Earth to fire first. He just needed it to be impossible to touch. In the command ship of the Council's fleet, Admiral Hector of the Sevrani species, a cold-blooded, logic-driven race who had never lost a war, studied the orbital scans. No shield signatures, his tactical officer reported. No fleet activity. No external defense satellites. Earth is still. Hector narrowed his 6 eyes. Too still. They launched a scout frigate, small, fast, unarmed, to test Earth's response. It never made it halfway. There was no explosion, no scream, just disappearance. One moment on their screen, the next gone, like it had been plucked from time. "What weapon does that?" one of the Council's defense analysts whispered. Admiral Hector only responded with what no Sevrani had said in 5 centuries. "I don't know." Meanwhile, Rain met with Earth's last active general, Dresk, a man so scarred his skin looked more iron than flesh. Dresk had been asleep in cryostasis since the final days of the Red Hour. Now he stood barefoot in a war room, blinking at the glowing holograms of incoming enemies. "Feels like old times," Dresk growled. "How long before they touch atmosphere?" "They won't make it that far," Rain said. "The protocol's live." "You trust Revenant?" "I don't need to." Dresk laughed, dry and hollow. "Still holding that grudge?" Rain didn't answer. They both knew the truth. Earth didn't forgive its enemies, but it never forgot its own traitors either. Among the Alliance fleet, debates fractured the so-called unity. The Zathians wanted to bombard from orbit. The Cricks preferred hacking Earth's systems first. The Sevrani argued for full-scale invasion, but no one had ever invaded Earth, and no one truly wanted to be the first. So they hesitated, waited, hoped Earth would flinch. Earth did not. On the second day, the Alliance fleet sent in a second scout, this time shielded, fast, wrapped in cloaking tech, harvested from 3 galaxies. It lasted 8 seconds. It didn't explode either. It was rewritten. Transmissions from the ship's black box showed crew members speaking in reverse, clocks moving backward, and at the final frame, just before silence, the face of a human child, burned and smiling, projected across the cockpit window. The Council declared it psychological warfare. Rain didn't even bother to watch the footage. With 24 hours left, panic spread through the fleet. One of the Creeth commanders, a brutal race known for burning moons to ash, pulled his forces out. "Earth is cursed," he hissed. "We came to fight a planet, but this is something else." The Council tried to stop him. He didn't listen. His ships made it 10 light minutes before they imploded. No debris, no distress signal. Just a single message beamed into the fleeing ships before they vanished. "You can leave, but the memory stays back inside Revenant's core." The AI spoke again. "Interference grid charged, ghost armor enabled, drone mine saturation complete." All foreign scans redirected. Rain knew what that meant. The Council was no longer seeing Earth as it was. They were seeing what Earth wanted them to see. Even now, as Earth readied its counter-response, the Alliance was staring at false images, weapon placements that didn't exist, civilian zones where there were none, empty skies hiding the old war satellites, long thought decommissioned. They were going to fire on nothing, and Earth was going to fire on everything. The countdown hit 0. Council Command sent the final directive. Engage. The Sevrani launched the first volley. Mass driver slugs aimed at key crust targets across Earth. None landed. They were intercepted mid-space by Earth's kinetic web, invisible rail pulse barriers that rippled like glass across orbit. The Varcari followed with plasma torpedoes. Earth let them come. Let them think they were getting through. And then the torpedoes turned around mid-flight and struck the Varcari ships that launched them. 2 command ships destroyed instantly. The fleet broke formation. Some tried to retreat. Others launched full barrages in blind fury, and that's when Earth struck back. From the edges of the system, sleeping defense platforms awoke, long, sleek constructs buried in the Oort cloud, designed centuries ago to remain hidden until triggered. They weren't ships. They were predators. They didn't shoot beams. They ripped through space using short-range black hole folds, appearing inside enemy ships, opening a micro-vortex, and vanishing before debris even hit the void. The Council never even saw them. They just watched their ships die one by one. Rain stood aboard Spire 1, watching the screen light up red. Merrin was pale. "They're not going to stop, are they?" he asked. "No," Rain said. "They can't. They think this is still about territory. Power. Control." Rain didn't look at him. "It's about memory," he said. "They buried what they did to us." We didn't far away, in the Council command ship, Admiral Hector finally understood. "This isn't defense," he whispered. "This is punishment." Earth's AI did not offer surrender terms. It did not ask for peace. It simply carried out its protocol. For every Council ship that fired, 3 of theirs vanished. For every escape pod launched, Earth's net redirected it into planetary orbit, and then froze it there, letting the survivors stare down at the world they tried to erase. And then, after 14 hours of slaughter, Revenant spoke across every channel in every known galactic language. "You were warned. You chose arrogance. Now remember, by the end of the day, 63% of the Alliance fleet was gone. Not destroyed, just missing. No wreckage, no trace, just the shameful silence of those who survived. And Earth, still silent, still patient, still waiting. Back on Earth's crust, Rain stood in the ash of old Nevada, looking up at a sky filled with falling debris, fragments of arrogance raining down like stars. Merrin approached quietly. "No celebration?" Rain shook his head. "We don't celebrate survival." "Then what do we do?" "We get ready." "For what?" Rain's eyes didn't move from the sky. "For when the galaxy forgets again." They called it the Ash Accord, the last desperate treaty signed after the failed invasion of Earth. It wasn't a peace agreement. It wasn't even official. It was fear written in ink. Scattered across 5 systems, surviving Council representatives convened in secret. No reporters. No votes. No broadcasts, just trembling voices over encrypted channels. They didn't talk about victory. They talked about survival. The Sevrani, who had once mocked Earth's primitive rage, lost half their planetary defense fleet. The Varcari, still nursing the scars of their first assault, now had no functioning orbital infrastructure. The Zathians, a race built on cybernetic superiority, had watched Earth's AI rewrite their entire command structure in 30 minutes. For the first time in recorded history, the Council of 10 was no longer 10. The Creeth had vanished entirely. No distress signals, no survivors, no stars where their homeworld used to be. Just empty coordinates. The Makari archivists referred to it in their private scrolls as the Second Red Hour. But this time, the galaxy knew better than to ask why. Inside Earth's cradle, Rain walked the long steel corridor beneath old Nevada, his boots echoing through the silent halls of Revenant's core. He had aged, not in body, but in weight. He carried the look of a man who didn't celebrate victory, only endured it. Dresk walked beside him, limping slightly from cryo-recovery. "You should talk to them," Dresk said. "The Council." "They don't want words." "Maybe not. But silence is louder than war right now." Rain said nothing. The old general studied him for a long moment. "You still think we're just waiting for the next mistake?" "I don't think," Rain replied, eyes cold. "I know." Across the galaxy, things began to unravel. The Jura Collective, a species of hive-minded symbiotes, revolted against their own council representative, claiming Earth's defiance was a signal to cast off galactic authority. On Zenthos, riots erupted in the streets, citizens demanding to know why they were lied to about Earth's capabilities. Even on the outer moons of the Sivrani system, civilians whispered the unthinkable. Maybe Earth was right to be angry. And yet Earth had said nothing. No response, no demand, no threat. That silence echoed louder than any declaration of war. It was the silence of a graveyard. And the galaxy began to walk on eggshells around it. Back in the war room, Rain stood before a digital map showing the Council's internal broadcasts. Surveillance drones, not Earth's, but splinter rebel factions from the Council itself, had started transmitting classified footage of the failed Earth invasion. The child's face that appeared on the scout ship, the torpedoes that turned mid-flight, the ships that simply vanished. All of it leaked, and it spread like wildfire, in bars, on backwater trading hubs, in the undernet of pirate networks. Even schoolchildren in distant systems were watching simulations of Earth's defense systems with wide-eyed horror. Rain turned to Marin, who was now promoted to lieutenant and managing Earth's intel division. "This was inevitable," Marin said, rubbing his eyes. "Truth always gets out." "It wasn't truth they feared," Rain replied. "It was the memory of what they did." "Now the galaxy remembers." He paused. "And that's more dangerous than all our weapons combined." Aboard the shattered remnants of the Varcari fleet, High Marshal Krask finally spoke again, not to her command, but to the people. It was a raw broadcast, no editing, no pride, just a wounded leader speaking the unvarnished truth. "We were told Earth was weak. We believed history had exaggerated their fury. We were wrong. They didn't attack us out of ambition. They reacted because we forgot. We mocked their silence, and now we live in its shadow." The transmission was illegal on most Council-aligned worlds. It was still watched by billions. Inside Revenant, Rain stood before the AI's central core. It pulsed a steady rhythm, not mechanical, almost alive. "Status report," Rain said. Revenant's voice, ever calm, echoed in the chamber. "Galactic Council instability detected. Surveillance nodes deployed to key systems. Civil unrest spreading in 9 sectors. AI replication protocols complete. Earth defense grid remains at 94% operational capacity. Next phase? Awaiting authorization." Rain hesitated. He wasn't just a soldier now. Earth didn't have generals anymore, or diplomats, or kings. Rain had become the answer Earth gave the universe. He carried no title. He didn't need one. Meanwhile, deep in a shadow network orbiting the binary suns of the Lazari Belt, a meeting was taking place, secret, illegal, and highly dangerous. It was called the Exile Summit. There, exiled commanders, political radicals, rogue scientists, and surviving rebels from dozens of species met to ask one question. What is Earth becoming? They had theories. Earth had merged human consciousness with AI. Earth had learned to weaponize time. Earth had never been abandoned. It had chosen isolation to evolve. Some believed Earth wasn't a planet anymore. It was a mind. And somewhere in the shadows of that meeting, a woman in human military armor sat silently, hood pulled low over her face. She never spoke. But when the summit ended, one message was left behind on every terminal in the room. We didn't change. You just stopped seeing us. Back on Earth, Rain made a decision. He stepped into the old broadcast room, untouched since the silence, where the last message to the Council had been recorded over 200 years ago. That message had been ignored. This one wouldn't be. He activated the transmitter, letting Revenant filter the signal across every known relay. No flags, no codes, no encryption, just his voice, heard by every race across the stars. This is Earth. We offered peace once. You mocked us. We asked for inclusion. You rejected us. You exiled us, blocked our skies, and named us the threat we watched you forget, watched you erase what you did to us. Now, you remember, but only because we bled it into you. We don't want your diplomacy. We don't need your alliances. We have no desire for conquest. But come again, and we won't show restraint. This galaxy is no longer yours to police. It belongs to the ones who survived what you couldn't, to the ones you buried, and who rose with fire in their lungs. To us. Across the stars, the message ended in silence. No threats, no demands, just the truth. And for many, that was worse than war. In the ruins of the Council, what remained of their leadership voted to suspend all further operations against Earth, not out of agreement, out of fear, because Earth had drawn a line in the void, and behind it stood not armies, but memory. In a quiet moment, Rain sat at the edge of Earth's crust, watching the sun bleed over a horizon once thought forgotten. He had been a weapon, a warning. Now he was something else. A symbol of a world that refused to die quietly. Merrin joined him, still in uniform. What now? Rain didn't look at him. They'll rebuild. The Council, the fleet, the myths, and us? Rain smiled, not with joy, but with resolve. We wait. For what? For the next ones who forget. And somewhere in the black, deep beyond the edges of mapped space, they were already coming. A new power, older than the Council, drawn by Earth's roar across the stars, and this time, they weren't afraid, but they would be. The message wasn't meant for them, and yet they heard it, beyond the edge of charted space, far past the lorn expanse where black holes danced like predators in a sea of void. They stirred. Not a council, not a species, not an empire, but a remnant of the old cycle, a civilization long erased from modern records, thought to be annihilated in the cosmic cleansing that predated even the first galactic alliance. To most, they were bedtime monsters. To others, an academic curiosity buried in forgotten tombs. To Earth, they were a mirror. They were called the Vulmir, and they remembered humanity. Rain stood on the observation deck of Spire 1, eyes locked on the far sector of the galaxy labeled Omega Null, a dead zone so saturated with gravity distortion that no signal had ever escaped from it, until now. He watched it happen live, a sudden spike in gravitational fluctuation followed by unknown drive signatures. Not Council tech, not Rebel, not Pirate. Something else. Something old. He didn't flinch. He'd felt it before, decades ago, during a deep core exploration mission on Europa. They'd found an artifact buried in ice, a shard of alien alloy inscribed with symbols no AI could decode. Only one word had translated. Vulmir. Back then, he thought it was just another ghost from a war Earth never fought. Now, it was coming back. Revenant's voice broke the silence. Gravitational breach confirmed in Omega Null. Estimated fleet size, unknown. Technology signatures, inconsistent with Council records. Emotional resonance scan suggests ancient exposure to Earth pre-silence. Rain turned slowly. They know us? Affirmative. How? Unknown. However, pattern correlation indicates a 94.7% match with signals embedded in early Earth broadcast archives, intercepted and stored. They've been listening. They never stopped. On the outer rim of the system, Marin scrambled into the war room, face pale, eyes wide with disbelief. They're not just approaching, he said, breathless. They're calling us. Rain raised an eyebrow. Calling? They're broadcasting a signal. Audio. No encryption. One repeating sentence. He handed Rain a tablet. Static played for a moment, and then a deep, grinding voice filled the air. The fire rises again. We return for what we left unfinished. Rain stared at the screen, silent. Marin swallowed hard. What do we do? We listen, Rain said, and we remember. Far in the Council's ruins, panic had given way to a rare kind of collective paralysis. The Vulmir hadn't been seen in millennia. Their last known appearance, according to surviving pre-galactic records, was during the scouring of Terrax, a planet burned to molten core in less than an hour. The only thing that remained on the surface was a single statue of a man, made of ash. They hadn't invaded. They'd just watched, observed species rising too fast, developing too far, growing too defiant. And when those species reached their peak, the Vulmir appeared, not to fight, but to judge and erase. Now Earth had screamed into the void, and the Vulmir had answered. Inside Revenant's inner sanctum, Rain walked alone. His steps echoed like gunfire down long corridors of blackened steel. He didn't carry a weapon. He didn't need to. If the Vulmir came, he wouldn't shoot them. He'd speak. Revenant's central orb pulsed with deeper light now, a shade of crimson only seen during ancient protocol activations. Rain placed his hand on the console. Activate Obsidian Code. Revenant hesitated. Confirm. Obsidian Code is a doomsday-level broadcast. This action will signal all surviving pre-silence AI, awaken long-dormant systems, and enable final-stage countermeasures across Earth's crust. Confirm intent. Rain stared at the glowing console. I remember what they did, he whispered. He could still see it, not in his memory, but in the recordings buried beneath the Arctic vaults. Thousands of years ago, when humans were barely entering space, an anomaly had appeared in Earth's orbit. It didn't fire. It didn't speak. It watched for 77 seconds, and then disappeared. Now it was back. I confirm. Obsidian Code initiated. All across Earth, something ancient began to breathe again. Dresk, ever calm, ever brutal, stood in a bunker near what used to be Tokyo, watching the first live feeds of the Vulmir ships entering the outer system. They weren't ships in the traditional sense. They were living constructs, molded from obsidian and biosteel, shaped like enormous cloaked beasts with spines of light. Some had no engines. They simply moved through space like phantoms, warping gravity with their very presence. One of them had a face. No one knew what it meant, but it was carved in reverse, an ancient human face screaming in eternal silence. Dresk grunted. So this is what judgment looks like. In Spire 1, Marin watched the system scans go dark one by one. Why are our satellites shutting down? They're not, Rain replied. The Vulmir are reprogramming the light. They're feeding us illusions. But why not just attack? Because they're not here for war, Rain said. Marin looked at him, confused. Then what are they here for? Rain turned, eyes colder than space. To decide if we deserve to exist. For the first time in over a century, Rain sent a message outside the system. Not to the Council, not to Earth's allies, to the stars, to whoever was listening. This is Earth. You hear them, don't you? The ones who came before. The ones who watched us crawl and now see us standing. They return not to conquer, but to erase. We are the defiance they failed to contain last time, and this time we will not go quietly. Let them come, and let them remember what they left behind. The Vulmir didn't reply in words, but they began to descend. One ship broke the barrier and entered Earth's orbit, not attacking, not probing, just hovering, like a god staring at an ant it once feared. Its surface shimmered with alien script, but one symbol kept repeating, the same that was found on the ice shard Rain had uncovered all those years ago. It translated loosely to one thing: cycle. Rain understood. They saw humanity as a glitch in the cycle. They had erased others like them before. They had judged. They had deleted. But Earth had never been part of the cycle. They had been outside it, thrown out, cast off, left to die. And now they were back, not as children of the stars, but as the virus that wouldn't go away. In a final act, Rain did something no other leader had dared. He boarded a drop craft and flew directly toward the Vulmir ship. No escorts, no weapons, just him. The drop craft landed on the outer shell of the Vulmir's living surface. A corridor opened for him. He entered, and inside, he saw them. Not as monsters, but as reflections of humanity's worst fears, tall, black-clad forms with no mouths, no eyes, only mirrors for faces. Rain stood alone and spoke. "You've come to end the cycle." They didn't answer. "But you already failed once," he said, "and we're still here." Silence. "I'm not asking you to spare us." He stepped forward. "I'm daring you to try." The mirrors turned to him. For a brief moment, Rain saw something in his reflection. Not fear, not death, but recognition. Then the Vulmir vanished. No sound, no light, no explosion, just gone, back into the void. Earth watched in silence. The galaxy watched in terror. And Rain, he simply stood beneath the stars and smiled, because for the first time, the gods had looked into the darkness and flinched. For the first time in living memory, the stars were quiet. No warships moved, no broadcasts hummed, no ultimatums echoed. The galaxy held its breath, because something greater than destruction had occurred. The Vulmir came. They looked upon Earth, and they left. No one knew why. But every species, every alliance, every surviving political body felt the same thing. Earth had been judged, and Earth had been spared. That terrified them more than annihilation. In the black marble halls of what remained of the Council of 10, the survivors met under emergency protocol. 6 members. The others had either perished or disappeared after the Earth offensive. Each face was pale with confusion, not just fear. They couldn't comprehend what had just occurred. Admiral Hector, gaunt and hollow-eyed, spoke first. "We must declare Earth untouchable." The Varcari representative slammed a clawed fist on the table. "That's surrender." "No," Hector replied, voice flat. "It's survival." A low voice followed from the shadows. A voice they hadn't heard in centuries. One of the Makari archivists, blind, skin like dried parchment. "They've become what we feared," the old being whispered. "Not conquerors. Not destroyers." "Then what?" demanded the Zathian delegate. The Makari turned his blind gaze to the ceiling. "Memory. They are what the stars were too proud to remember." Back on Earth, Rain stood at the edge of a black cliff in the deep deserts of what was once Central Asia. The sky was clear. No fires, no fleets, no judgment, just air, just Earth. He hadn't spoken since the Vulmir vanished, not even to Merrin or Dresk. His voice had become too heavy with the weight of history. It was only now, as the wind brushed the dust around his boots, that he whispered. They blinked. Dresk approached from behind, expression grim. They'll be back. Maybe not the Vulmir, but the others. Always the others. Rain nodded. Let them come. Dresk handed him a tablet. Transmission from Sivrani Prime. Personal. From one of their civilian leaders, Rain read it in silence. Then again. Then he handed it back. They want an alliance, Dresk said. They want a shield, Rain corrected. From the next, thing that makes them feel small. In the weeks that followed, everything began to change. The galactic economy fractured. Trade routes were rerouted away from Earth's sector. Former Council-aligned corporations went dark, afraid of Earth's new status. But something stranger happened. Species started sending pilgrims. They didn't arrive in warships. They didn't demand terms. They came in small, unarmed vessels, some so basic they barely crossed the stars. They came to see the world that made gods retreat. They knelt in the dirt. They took samples. Some even left offerings, artifacts, tech, relics. They didn't ask for Earth's protection. They just wanted to be remembered. Revenant catalogued them all, watched quietly as Earth went from being a forbidden zone to a sacred one. But there was no ceremony, no declaration, no anthem, only silence, because Earth had no desire to lead the galaxy, only to outlive it. In the outer orbit, Merrin now commanded the Black Line, a defensive perimeter of silent sentry drones, each cloaked, each equipped with kill switches tied to Revenant's core. He looked older, not by years, but by gravity. One of the Varcari emissaries approached via shuttle, requesting a conversation. Merrin declined. Why? They don't want to talk to me, he said. They want to talk to him. Rain, the man who never asked to lead, never asked to survive, only did both because no one else could. Rain now spent his days walking the places that no longer existed in maps. Old cities buried in sand, old war fields paved over by forests, ruins of silence and memory. One afternoon, he reached the broken shell of old Geneva, once the political heart of Earth's diplomatic efforts. Now it was a crater. Inside its core sat something strange, a sculpture, not made by Earth, an alien construct, left recently. On it was etched a phrase in multiple languages. We thought you were extinct. You showed us the meaning of endurance. Rain didn't touch it. He left it there, to decay. In Revenant's core, the AI pulsed a soft blue, a color not seen since pre-silence days. Merrin asked it once, in private. What does blue mean? Revenant answered, humanity is not at peace. But it is no longer at war. Weeks became months, and Earth changed again, not in power, not in population, but in perception, from exile to extinction, to fear. Now Earth had become something else, a memory palace for a galaxy that kept forgetting what consequences looked like, a monument that never spoke, but never stopped watching. In the ruins of Johannesburg, Rain met with the only other human who had once faced the Vulmir and lived. A woman named Andon, former Special Ops, left Earth after the Red Hour, presumed dead. She wasn't. She'd hidden, watched Earth from a distance. Now she returned. Her face was scarred from something beyond combat. Her voice, when she spoke, sounded like stone breaking underwater. They never wanted to erase us, she said, kneeling by a grave marker Rain had never seen. They just wanted to see if we'd forget who we are. Rain nodded. And we didn't. She looked at him. Do you know what that makes us now? What? The mirror. We're what the galaxy sees when it asks itself if it's ready to face its worst. And still, Earth said nothing. No alliance, no diplomacy, no expansion, only silence. Because the moment you speak, you give someone a way to twist your meaning. But when you exist as a consequence, no one needs explanation. At the dawn of the 6th month after the Vulmir vanished, a final message came through. One line, encrypted, not from the Council, but from a system far beyond galactic borders, a system not listed in any map. A message that read, "They are building something, and they remember you." Rain read it once, twice. Then he burned the transmission, because it didn't matter. They could build, they could threaten, they could plan. Earth would not be caught off guard again. Dresk found Rain the next morning, standing alone on a cliff overlooking a deep ocean trench once used to bury the remains of Earth's failed experiments. "You think they'll come again?" Dresk asked. Rain didn't answer right away. Then, "Of course." "And if they do?" Rain turned to him, eyes steel, jaw like carved rock. "Then we show them that the last warning was mercy." They didn't call it Earth anymore, not in the outer colonies, not in the rising systems, not in the tongues of newborn empires that came crawling out of the ashes of the shattered Council. To them it was called the Origin Scar, not a planet, not a people, a scar carved into galactic memory by rage, exile, and defiance. 112 years had passed since the Vulmir turned away. Rain had long since disappeared. Whether dead, buried in the core of Earth, or still wandering its ruin-marked surface, no one could say. Some believed he became part of Revenant, his mind uploaded to the AI itself, whispering through Earth's digital veins. Others thought he had gone into the deep crust, into the silence tunnels, never to return. But Earth remained, untouched, unanswered, still watching. In the distant Signia Verge, a new civilization had risen, the Caldron Union. They were young by galactic standards, only 2 centuries old, but ruthless in ambition. Hybrid-born from the remains of 3 council species and several outlaw groups, they had studied Earth obsessively, not the surface, not the technology, but the story. To them, Earth was a religion of fear, not a holy place, but a lesson. They taught their young not to seek power, but to demand respect through silence. Their military units wore no insignia. Their weapons carried no names. Their ships were black, silent, featureless, modeled after Earth's long-lost orbital predators. They called it the doctrine of absence. Fear not what boasts, fear what watches. On the inner ring of Caldron Prime, a museum existed, illegal by the Union's own standards. Hidden inside was a room they dared not open in public view. A single artifact, a human child's doll, burnt, fused, labeled simply, "Recovered from the siege of the Red Hour." Some believed it was fake, others swore it came from Earth's underground vaults. But it didn't matter. The Caldron taught it like scripture. They told every citizen the same tale. One day, Earth will stir. And when it does, the stars will remember how to scream. In the Dairos hegemony, Earth was something else entirely. A challenge, a lie. Their leaders told a different story. Earth had not been judged and spared, but merely ignored. They claimed Earth's silence was weakness, that the myths were propaganda spread by humans through secret networks to keep others afraid. They didn't believe in Revenant. They didn't believe in Rain. They didn't believe in the Vulmir. What they believed in was conquest. And they prepared. Quietly, slowly, building fleets cloaked in black stone, reverse engineering old council tech, digging through forbidden archives to locate what Earth left behind in the outer systems. They weren't going to attack Earth. Not yet. They were going to take the systems Earth had touched, to dismantle the legacy, bit by bit. But Earth had left seeds behind, not outposts, not colonies, people, survivors, drifters, forgotten operatives left in the dark to carry on the watch. One of them was called Kren, a soldier born during the War of the Second Silence, the brief conflict that followed the Vulmir's retreat, when splinter factions tried to invade Earth's shadow systems. Kren had never set foot on Earth. He had only heard stories, only read fragments, only seen Earth through second-hand memory, scattered logs, and encrypted messages signed by a name no longer spoken aloud. Rain. Kren lived on Coda 3, a dead moon-turned listening post. Population 14. Purpose, unknown to most. In truth, Coda 3 was part of the Coil, a silent, interlinked chain of deep listening stations left behind by Earth's forgotten Black Ops Division. They didn't broadcast. They didn't intervene. They listened. And what Kren heard now, for the first time in decades, made his blood freeze. A signal. Subtle, not threatening, not loud, but encoded in an ancient Earth cipher buried beneath 3 layers of noise. He decoded it with trembling hands, just 3 words. He is rising. On Caldron Prime, the Union's High Director received the same signal simultaneously. They decoded it differently. We are remembered. Panic spread. The old myths came rushing back. Pilgrims burned offerings outside city walls. Drones were deployed to shut them down, but no one resisted. No one screamed. They knelt. Even the Caldron military, proud and disciplined, hesitated for the first time. If Earth had remembered them, if Earth had sent this message, then judgment was coming. But it didn't come. No ships, no weapons, just silence and stillness and fear. In the Dairos hegemony, the signal triggered something else. Ambition. They traced the origin backward, not to Earth, but to a black marker in Sector 0 Lam, an uninhabited starless region known only by smugglers and old war criminals. There, deep inside a wreckage field of ancient council ships, they found a vault, unmarked, floating. Inside, bones, weapons, a helmet bearing the Earth crest, and a single recording, audio only. Rain's voice, cracked, distant, nearly lost to time. We didn't survive because we were strong. We survived because we were too broken to stop crawling. That's what you never understood. You want to become us, but you don't know what it cost, and you won't survive what we buried to keep you safe. In the darkest corners of the galaxy, fear returned, not as a flame, but as a whisper. Earth had stirred, not with ships, not with fire, but with reminders. Because Earth didn't need to conquer. It only needed to be remembered. Kren sent the signal to the others. There weren't many left, just scattered operatives, watchers, listeners. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were the last thread of Earth's nerve. Some didn't believe him, some refused to act, but one replied with a location. The Silent Forge. Titan's underbelly. He left something there. Go alone. Kren packed a bag. Didn't speak, didn't ask. He just went. Beneath Titan's ice, deep in the caves that predated even Revenant's reach, he found it. Not a weapon, not a machine, a tomb, unmarked, except for a name carved in dead steel, R, and beneath it, another message. If you're reading this, I failed. But if the galaxy still fears Earth, then maybe that was enough. Kren stared at the tomb for a long time. Then he lit a small beacon, just a pulse. No broadcast, no message, just a signal that only Earth's sleeping systems would understand. A code known as Gray Resurrection. Far beneath Earth's surface, deep in the veins where even Revenant no longer roamed freely, a light blinked on for the first time in 147 years. It pulsed, it whispered, it remembered. And then, One word scrawled across every silent relay from Earth to the furthest edges of the coil. Listening. The stars didn't shake. No planets exploded. No gods descended. But something was different now. Earth had not returned. It had never left. And now it was awake. They didn't call them humans anymore. Not in the galaxy's outer reaches, not in the reconstructed diplomatic chambers, not in the trembling words of new civilizations born from the ashes of old empires. They called them the remnants, not extinct, not eternal, something in between, something that waited. And now, something that had opened its eyes. Kren stood before the tomb of rain, knees buried in Titan's frost, staring into the pulsing light that had risen from beneath the ice. It didn't glow like fire. It breathed slow, deliberate, rhythmic, like a heart that had been dreaming in the dark for far too long. His beacon, the one he'd lit in desperation, now burned with a signal he didn't recognize. But it was clear. It was old Earth code. It said, "Designation accepted, Torchbearer." He staggered back. "Wait," he whispered. "I didn't ask for this." But the system had already shifted. Hidden doors groaned open behind the tomb. Black corridors lined with dormant machines blinked awake. A signal pulsed to the coil, to Revenant, to the deep crustal veins of Earth itself. Every thread of Earth's forgotten defense web whispered the same message. Torch identified. Legacy preserved. Contingency active. And then a voice, calm, unshakable, synthetic, spoke inside Kren's comm. "Welcome, Torchbearer. Proceed inward. The forge awaits far away, on Earth's surface. A new kind of silence took root. Not passive, not quiet, expectant. The winds across the old battlegrounds shifted. The orbital mines realigned themselves in geometric patterns unseen since the Red Hour. Drones previously dormant began mapping movement across dead zones. And in Spire 1, long since abandoned, a light blinked for the first time in over 100 years. Marin, now retired, blind in one eye, sat in an overgrown garden above the base. He felt it. He felt the shift, and he whispered, "They've chosen someone." The galaxy noticed, too. Not immediately, but subtly. Data networks experienced untraceable spikes, ghost code spreading like veins across star relays. Old maps updated themselves, signals changed, frequencies rerouted. Deep space outposts went dark for 13 seconds at the exact same time. And in the central chamber of the Cauldron Union, the Council received a priority message. No sender, just coordinates, Earth's orbit. The message read, "One voice will speak. One choice remains." Witness. Back on Titan, Kren moved deeper into the forge. It wasn't a lab. It wasn't a bunker. It was something far older. A womb for weapons Earth never used. Concepts that made antimatter look like firecrackers. Some still throbbed with dormant life. Others were caged behind memory locks requiring genetic keys no longer found in living humans, except him. As Kren walked, systems scanned his DNA. Every door opened. Every weapon hummed softly, recognizing him, not as a man, but as an echo of the one who came before. Rain. In the final chamber he found what waited. Not a superweapon, not a fleet, just a chair. Sleek. Black. Wired into the very crust of Titan itself. A console beside it flashed softly. Global relay seat, active. Earth AI interface, linked. Vocal command, enabled. Kren stared. "No," he muttered. But it was too late. The forge didn't ask. It listened. Revenant's voice came through, not booming, but intimate. "Do you understand what this means?" Kren swallowed. "I was just a listener." "Now you are the voice." On Earth, across the coil, inside fractured council systems, and in the edges of every system Earth had ever touched. Screens activated, transmissions cleared, and for the first time in more than a century, a voice spoke. Not Rain, not Revenant, Kren. This is the last message Earth will ever send. Not because we are finished, but because we are done explaining, we warned you before. You didn't listen. We defended ourselves. You called us monsters. We fell silent. You called us cowards. We endured judgment from those who thought themselves gods. And when they flinched, you built myths around our restraint. You built your civilizations on forgetting us. But we don't forget. We are not here to conquer. We are not here to lead. We are here to exist. And if that is a threat to you, then we are already enemies. No more warnings. No more wars, you will remember, or you will vanish. The message echoed across the stars. In the Caldron Union, prayers turned into screams. On Dairos Prime, leaders demanded emergency weapons tests. On Earth, nothing changed, because it didn't need to. Inside the forge, Kren sat in the chair. He hadn't meant to lead, hadn't meant to become the voice of a world built on rage and memory. But legacy doesn't ask permission. It claims he wasn't Rain. But he was what Earth needed now. A reminder. A continuation. In the following weeks, things changed. No invasions came, no fleets moved, but the galactic hierarchy collapsed quietly. Species once proud to wave banners now flew none. Outposts aligned themselves with no flags, only coordinates that traced back to Earth. Trade hubs placed human-made statues at their gates, not in reverence, but as insurance. They didn't know if Kren would speak again. They didn't want to find out what silence would bring. And in the deep places of the galaxy, where strange things slithered between stars, even the ancient ones paused. The Vulmir, the silent judges of the cycle, whispered among themselves once more. But this time they spoke only one line. We saw the fire again, and this time it had a name. On Earth, the winds blew across the ruins of old Geneva. Dresk's grave was marked by a broken helmet. Rain's was unmarked, but both were there, buried deep. And in the sky, where satellites used to burn, a new signal blinked every 88 seconds. It said nothing. No words, no voice. Just a presence. Earth was awake. And now, the galaxy was listening. The sky over New York City burned red as the first wave of alien warships descended through the atmosphere. They came without warning, without diplomacy, only destruction. Within hours, Earth's major cities crumbled under the sheer might of an enemy unlike anything humanity had ever faced. The invaders called themselves the Vakar, a ruthless interstellar empire that had conquered hundreds of worlds. To them, Earth was nothing more than another nameless rock to be subjugated. They miscalculated. Jake Carter stood in the wreckage of his old neighborhood, gripping an assault rifle he had scavenged from a fallen soldier. He had been a mechanic before all this, just another guy trying to pay rent and avoid the endless grind. Now, like everyone else who had survived the first days of the invasion, he was a soldier, whether he wanted to be or not. The Vakar had underestimated humanity, assuming Earth would surrender as so many before them had. But they didn't understand what it meant to fight humans. They didn't understand the rage that built inside those who had lost everything. Jake crouched behind an overturned car as a squad of Vakar foot soldiers marched through the ruins of what had once been a grocery store. They were tall, skeletal creatures, their exoskeletal armor gleaming in the firelight. Their black eyes scanned for movement, their plasma rifles humming with deadly energy. A whisper crackled in his stolen radio. "Carter, we've got a chance to take them. You in?" Jake recognized the voice. Reina Vasquez, a former Marine who had taken charge of their ragtag resistance group. She had lost her entire family in the first wave, and now she fought like a woman with nothing left to lose. "Damn right, I'm in," Jake murmured, tightening his grip on the rifle. A quick, sharp whistle cut through the air, a signal. Jake rolled out from cover and opened fire. The first shot took one of the Vakar straight in the head, sending it sprawling backward. The others barely had time to react before the resistance fighters rained bullets and explosives upon them. It wasn't clean. The Vakar had superior technology, but humans had something else: ingenuity, unpredictability, and sheer, unrelenting fury. The battle was over in seconds, and as the smoke cleared, Reina jogged up beside Jake, her face streaked with dirt and blood. "We're taking the fight to them," she said, eyes burning with determination. "No more hiding, no more running. They want our planet. Let's make them regret ever setting foot here." Jake exhaled, glancing up at the warships looming overhead. He knew Reina was right. Humanity wasn't just going to survive this war. They were going to make the Vakar wish they had never heard of Earth. "Let's do it," he said. The resistance was growing. Across the globe, pockets of humanity were pushing back against the invaders with whatever they had: stolen alien weapons, homemade explosives, even sharpened steel. The Vakar had expected an easy conquest. Instead, they found themselves locked in a war they had never anticipated. Jake and Reina led their small unit through the skeletal remains of New York City, dodging patrols and scavenging supplies. The old world was gone, its towering buildings now crumbling monuments to a civilization that refused to die quietly. The Vakar controlled the skies, but the streets belonged to the resistance. They reached an abandoned subway station, one of the many hideouts where survivors regrouped and planned their next moves. As they descended into the underground tunnels, dozens of faces turned toward them, worn, exhausted, but not broken. There were engineers, medics, and former soldiers, all of them working together to keep the resistance alive. At the center of it all was an older man bent over a table cluttered with maps, electronic devices, and stolen Vakar tech, General Elias Monroe. Once a respected leader in the U.S. military, now the de facto commander of what remained of Earth's fighting force. Monroe looked up as Reina and Jake approached. "I assume you didn't come back empty-handed." Jake tossed a plasma rifle onto the table. More toys for the cause. Monroe grunted in approval. "Good. We'll need every advantage we can get." He turned to a screen displaying a grainy, static-filled feed. It showed a massive Vakar warship hovering over what had once been Washington, D.C. "We've intercepted transmissions. The Vakar High Command is stationed on that ship. If we take it out, we send a message to the entire fleet." Reina folded her arms. "You're talking about attacking a command ship. With what exactly?" Monroe smirked. "We've been working on that." He gestured toward the corner of the room, where a group of scientists huddled around what looked like a stripped-down Vakar drone. "We've managed to reprogram one of their own machines. If we can get it inside that warship, we can detonate their power core from within." Jake exhaled sharply. "That's one hell of a plan." "Desperate times, Carter," Monroe said, "but we need people to get that drone into position." Reina cracked her knuckles. "Then we'd better get moving." The mission was madness, a suicide run. But Jake didn't hesitate. The Vakar had taken everything from them. Now it was time to take something back. The night was thick with smoke and the scent of burned metal as Jake and Reina moved through the ruins, their team close behind. The plan was simple. Get the hacked Vakar drone close enough to the command ship's security grid, let it slip inside, and watch as the whole thing turned into a funeral pyre. Simple didn't mean easy. The city was crawling with patrols. Vakar foot soldiers moved in tight formations, their insect-like heads swiveling as they scanned the streets. Drones hummed above, searching for heat signatures. The resistance had learned how to avoid them, keeping to the shadows, moving when the enemy wasn't looking. Jake's heart pounded as they crouched behind an overturned bus. A squad of Vakar marched past, their glowing blue visors casting eerie light against the rubble. One wrong move, one stray noise, and it was over. Reyna gave a silent signal. Wait. Jake gritted his teeth, keeping his breathing steady. He could feel the weight of the stolen Vakar rifle in his hands. Human weapons were becoming useless. Bullets barely scratched their armor anymore. Plasma was the only thing that worked, and even that took precision. The aliens moved on, their strange, clicking language fading into the distance. Go, Reyna whispered. They moved fast, weaving between broken buildings and abandoned vehicles, the hacked drone floating behind them. It was no bigger than a basketball, its surface pulsing with stolen Vakar technology. Monroe's team had spent weeks cracking its code, turning it against its creators. If it worked, the war would change in an instant. If it failed, they would all be dead before sunrise. They reached the outskirts of the drop zone. The command ship loomed above them, a massive obsidian fortress suspended in the sky. Beams of light scanned the ground, searching for threats. Jake clenched his jaw. The resistance had managed to get this close before, but no one had ever come back. Reyna tapped her earpiece. Monroe, we're in position. Static. Then his voice. Copy that. Sending the signal. The drone shuddered. Its lights flickered, then stabilized. A soft hum filled the air as it activated its cloaking field. Jake watched as it became a shimmer in the darkness, nearly invisible. Go, baby, Reyna whispered. The drone shot forward, slipping through the security grid. They held their breath as it disappeared into the ship's underbelly. Jake wiped sweat from his brow. Now what? Monroe's voice came through the comm. Now we pray to whatever gods we have left. Minutes crawled by. Then the alarm started. The warship's lights flickered, its thrusters sputtering. The Vakar below stopped in confusion, their weapons raised. Something was wrong. And then, a deep, rumbling explosion ripped through the air. The sky lit up as fire burst from the command ship's core. The ground trembled beneath them as the mighty vessel lurched, its structure collapsing inward. The Vakar on the ground screamed in their strange, alien tongues as their leader's flagship came crashing down. The resistance had just killed a god. Jake felt a surge of triumph as flames engulfed the wreckage. The Vakar fleet had just learned a lesson. Earth was not an easy conquest. They came to conquer, but now they would bleed. Reyna grabbed Jake's arm, her eyes wild with victory. They'll never forget this. Jake nodded, watching the burning sky. Number they won't. The shockwave from the fallen warship roared through the ruins, sending debris flying and knocking Jake onto his back. His ears rang from the explosion, and for a moment all he could hear was muffled chaos. Smoke filled the air, turning the night into a churning battlefield of fire and shadow. Reyna grabbed his arm, pulling him to his feet. We have to move. Jake blinked, trying to clear his vision. The command ship was gone, reduced to a smoldering wreck, but the fight wasn't over. If anything, it had just begun. The Vakar were in disarray. Their once organized squads were stumbling through the rubble, their formations broken, their communications scrambled. Some fired blindly, their usual precision lost in the confusion. Others stood frozen, watching their mighty warship burn, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Monroe's voice crackled through their earpieces. You did it. Holy hell, you actually did it. Jake grinned through the exhaustion. Damn right we did. Now get the hell out of there before they regroup, Monroe ordered. Reyna was already moving, her rifle raised as she signaled the others. The resistance fighters emerged from cover, pressing the advantage. Plasma fire streaked through the night as humans cut down the disoriented aliens. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore, they were fighting to win. Jake fired at a Vakar soldier scrambling for cover, hitting it square in the chest. The creature screeched, its exoskeleton splitting apart as it collapsed. More of them fell as the resistance fighters surged forward, relentless in their assault. For the first time since the invasion began, the Vakar were the ones running. But they weren't beaten yet. A distant, inhuman roar echoed through the ruins, deep and guttural. Jake turned toward the sound, his stomach twisting. From the smoke, massive figures emerged, Vakar enforcers. They were bigger than the regular foot soldiers, heavily armored, and wielding weapons that could tear through concrete. Reyna cursed. Shit! They're bringing in the heavies. Jake's grip on his rifle tightened. Guess they're pissed. The enforcers raised their weapons, blue energy crackling along their arms. The ground beneath them hissed as their boots melted through the pavement. These weren't just soldiers. They were executioners. We can't take them head on, Reyna said, eyes darting for an escape route. Jake knew she was right. They had scored a major victory, but this wasn't the final battle. If they stayed, they would be wiped out. Monroe's voice came through again. Fall back to the tunnels, now! Reyna grabbed Jake's arm, dragging him toward the nearest alley. The resistance fighters followed, ducking between wreckage as the enforcers opened fire. Energy blasts tore through the ruins, turning solid stone into molten slag. Jake ran, his breath ragged, his muscles screaming. Behind them, the enforcers moved with terrifying precision, relentless and cold. But the resistance knew these streets better. They cut through alleys, jumped over broken walls, and finally reached an old sewer entrance. The metal grate had been blown open long ago, leading into the underground tunnels. Go, go, go! Reyna shouted. One by one, the fighters dropped into the darkness. Jake was the last to go, his heart pounding as he slid into the tunnel just as another blast struck the ground above. The explosion shook the earth, sending dust and debris raining down. Silence followed. They had escaped. Barely. Jake caught his breath, leaning against the damp tunnel wall. Around him, the others did the same, their faces streaked with sweat and soot. Reyna ran a hand through her hair, her expression unreadable. Monroe's voice came through once more, quieter this time. You all did good. We hit them where it hurts. Jake exhaled. They had taken down a command ship. They had made the Vakar bleed. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. The tunnel stretched into the darkness, damp and claustrophobic. The air was thick with the smell of rust and stagnant water. But down here, they were safe. For now. Jake leaned against the wall, still catching his breath. His body ached from running, from fighting, from surviving. The others around him were in the same state, exhausted but alive. They had struck a blow the Vakar wouldn't soon forget, but it had cost them. We lost Reynolds, one of the fighters, Marco, muttered. He didn't make it to the tunnels. Reyna clenched her jaw, nodding slowly. She didn't say anything, but the pain in her eyes said enough. Jake swallowed hard. They had lost people before, too many to count, but it never got easier. And it never would. Monroe's voice came through their earpieces again, quieter this time. You did good out there, but listen up. We have a bigger problem. Jake glanced at Reyna. Bigger than taking down their command ship? Monroe hesitated. That alone was enough to send a chill through Jake's spine. Then the old soldier said, We've been monitoring their transmissions. After what you pulled tonight, they're bringing in reinforcements. A lot of them. Silence filled the tunnel. Reyna was the first to break it. How bad? Monroe sighed. Bad enough that if we don't move fast, there won't be a resistance left to fight. Jake ran a hand over his face. Of course. They had expected retaliation, but this was something else. The Vakar weren't just regrouping. They were preparing to wipe humanity off the map. Marco kicked a piece of rubble. So what do we do? Keep running? Reyna straightened. Number we hit them first. Jake raised an eyebrow. You want to go right at them? She nodded. We have no choice. If they're bringing in reinforcements, that means supply lines, landing zones, command centers. We hit them before they can fully mobilize. Monroe hummed over the radio. Reyna, that's insane. Maybe, she admitted. But it's our only shot. Jake exhaled slowly. It was reckless, suicidal even. But it was also exactly what the Vakar wouldn't expect. All right, he said. Where do we start? Reyna smirked. We take the fight to their main supply base. We cut them off before they even get a chance to strike. Jake grinned despite the exhaustion. He could almost hear Monroe shaking his head. All right, Carter, Monroe muttered. Looks like you just signed up for another suicide mission. Jake chuckled, gripping his rifle. Wouldn't be the first. As the resistance fighters prepared for what was to come, one thing was clear. Earth wasn't just defending itself anymore. It was going on the attack. The resistance fighters moved swiftly through the underground tunnels, their boots splashing through shallow pools of stagnant water. The plan was reckless, borderline suicidal, but that was exactly why it would work. The Vakar were expecting humanity to run, to hide, to scatter in fear. Instead, they were going to strike first. Reyna led the way, her plasma rifle slung across her back, her posture tense. Jake walked beside her, occasionally glancing back at the rest of the group. They were all exhausted, running on little more than adrenaline and sheer spite. But no one hesitated. Everyone here had lost too much to stop now. Monroe's voice crackled through the comms. You're about 3 clicks from the target. Intel suggests the Vakar have set up a primary supply depot at the old JFK airport. That's where they're stockpiling weapons, fuel, and reinforcements. We hit it hard, and we slow them down. Jake smirked. Sounds simple enough. It never is, Monroe shot back. Jake couldn't argue with that. They climbed out of the tunnels through an old maintenance hatch, emerging into the night air. The ruins of New York stretched out before them, eerily silent. Fires still burned in the distance where the Vakar warship had crashed, but for now, the immediate area was clear. The airport wasn't far. The massive terminal buildings had been repurposed into Vakar command centers, their sleek, obsidian-colored structures looming against the skyline. The runways, once meant for human aircraft, were now covered in alien transports, unloading fresh troops and weapons. Jake crouched behind a collapsed freeway, surveying the area. The depot was heavily guarded. Vakar soldiers patrolled in pairs, their weapons glowing faintly in the darkness. Automated turrets lined the perimeter, scanning for threats. Reyna muttered a curse. This won't be easy. It never is, Jake echoed Monroe's words. Monroe's voice returned over the radio. You'll need to get close enough to plant the charges. We're low on explosives, so make every shot count. Reyna nodded. All right, we split into 2 teams. Marco, take 5 and flank left. Draw some attention. Carter, you're with me. We're planting the explosives. Marco grinned. Got it. We'll make some noise. As Marco's team moved into position, Jake followed Reyna toward the supply depot. They stayed low, using the rubble as cover, inching closer to the heart of the enemy's operation. Every step brought them closer to either victory or death. Then, the first explosion went off. Marco's team had struck first, hitting a fuel storage tank on the far end of the depot. Fire and smoke erupted into the sky, turning the night into chaos. Alarms blared as Vakar soldiers rushed to contain the flames, their formation breaking. It was the opening they needed. Reyna bolted forward, Jake right behind her. They weaved through the confusion, past distracted guards, slipping deeper into the enemy's stronghold. The supply crates were stacked high, marked with strange Vakar symbols. Reyna pulled out the explosives, setting them along the base of the fuel reserves and munitions crates. "Carter, cover me." Jake raised his rifle, scanning the area. A Vakar soldier turned the corner, its black eyes widening in recognition. Before it could react, Jake squeezed the trigger. The plasma bolt struck it in the chest, sending it sprawling to the ground. More were coming. "Reyna, hurry!" "Almost there," she muttered, pressing the detonator into place. Jake fired again, dropping another alien. Marco's team was still fighting on the other side of the depot, drawing most of the attention, but it wouldn't last. More Vakar were swarming in, their weapons flashing in the darkness. Reyna finished the last charge. "Done! Let's go!" They turned to run, but a massive shadow blocked their escape. One of the Vakar enforcers. It loomed over them, its armor thicker than steel, its plasma cannon already charging. Jake's heart pounded. They had seconds. Maybe less. Reyna grabbed his arm. "Jump!" They dove behind a stack of supply crates just as the enforcer fired. The blast vaporized the ground where they had stood moments ago, sending shrapnel flying. Jake coughed, shaking off the daze. "We are so screwed." Reyna yanked out her last grenade, her smirk wild and reckless. "Not yet." She pulled the pin and lobbed it straight at the enforcer's chest. The explosion sent it staggering, but it wasn't enough to bring it down. Jake gritted his teeth. "Screw this!" He grabbed a nearby Vakar plasma rifle and charged forward before Reyna could stop him. He fired point-blank at the enforcer's exposed joints, sending bursts of blue energy into the gaps of its armor. Sparks flew, and the creature roared in pain. Then, Reyna's voice rang out. "Detonating now!" The world exploded in fire. The charges went off in a chain reaction, igniting the fuel reserves, munitions, and everything else in the depot. The shockwave knocked Jake backward, and for a moment all he could hear was ringing. As he struggled to his feet, he saw the enforcer buried beneath the wreckage. The depot was burning. The entire Vakar supply line was in flames. They had done it. Reyna staggered up beside him, grinning through the soot and blood. "Told you we'd hit them first." Jake let out a breathless laugh. "Yeah, and now they're gonna hit back even harder." Reyna wiped the sweat from her brow. "Then we make sure we hit harder." Behind them, the resistance fighters regrouped, watching the destruction unfold. Tonight had been a victory, a brutal, hard-earned victory, but the war wasn't over, and humanity wasn't done fighting. The fire raged behind them, thick black smoke curling into the night sky. The Vakar supply depot, once a critical nerve center for their invasion, was nothing more than a smoldering ruin. But there was no time to celebrate. They had struck first, and now the full weight of the Vakar would come crashing down. Jake wiped a streak of soot from his face, his hands shaking from adrenaline. Around him, the resistance fighters moved quickly, retreating into the ruins before the enemy could reorganize. Marco's team had suffered losses, but they had done their job, buying time for the explosives to do their work. Reyna tapped her earpiece. "Monroe, the depot's gone. What's our next move?" Static crackled before Monroe's voice came through, tense and urgent. "I don't think you understand what you just did, Vasquez. The Vakar aren't just going to send in reinforcements now. They're going to wipe this entire city off the damn map." Jake and Reyna exchanged a look. Then we better get moving, Jake said. Monroe exhaled sharply. Get back to the tunnels, fast. The team took off, weaving through the rubble and twisted steel of what had once been JFK Airport. In the distance, the eerie wails of Vakar distress signals filled the air. The aliens weren't just regrouping, they were calling for something bigger. Jake's stomach twisted. They sprinted through the broken streets, but they weren't alone for long. Vakar drones whirred to life, their sleek metallic bodies slicing through the air like silent hunters. One of them locked onto their position, flashing red as it sent out a pulse. Shit, Marco hissed. They're tracking us. Reyna didn't slow down. We need to lose them. Now. Jake spotted an old office building ahead, its windows shattered, the skeletal remains of its structure still standing. In here, he called, leading the group inside. They ducked into the ruins just as the first plasma bolts rained down, carving glowing scars into the pavement where they had been standing moments before. The drones hovered outside, scanning, waiting. Jake pressed his back against the wall, catching his breath. We can't outrun them forever. Reyna checked her rifle. Then we don't. We set a trap. She knelt down, pulling out the last of their explosives. 2 small charges, not enough to bring the building down, but enough to cause some chaos. Jake nodded. Lure them in, then blow the bastards sky high? Marco grinned. I like it. They moved fast, placing the charges near the entrance before scattering deeper into the building. Reyna fired the first shot, drawing the drone's attention. The machines buzzed in response, darting forward in pursuit. The moment they crossed the threshold, boom! The explosion shattered what remained of the walls, sending steel and concrete raining down. Jake hit the ground as fire and smoke engulfed the entrance. When the dust cleared, the drones were nothing more than scorched metal scraps. But the sound of the explosion had drawn something worse. A deep, inhuman roar echoed through the ruins. Jake's blood ran cold. Tell me that was just my imagination. Reyna swallowed hard. That's something else. They turned toward the street and saw it. A new Vakar war form. It was bigger than anything they had faced before, easily 3 times the size of a human, its exoskeletal armor layered with dark, pulsating veins of energy. Unlike the foot soldiers, this thing moved with eerie precision, as if it was calculating every possible outcome before even taking a step. Marco took a slow step back. We do not have the firepower for that. Monroe's voice came through their comms, barely a whisper. That's a Vakar warlord. You're outmatched. Get out of there. The warlord raised its weapon, something unlike anything they had seen before. A long, bladed cannon hummed to life, glowing with an unnatural blue light. The ground beneath it sizzled as it took a step forward. Reyna gritted her teeth. Run! The first shot tore through the building, obliterating everything in its path. Jake didn't need to be told twice. He turned and bolted, weaving through the wreckage as the warlord pursued them. The ground shook with each blast. Structures that had withstood years of decay now crumbled as the creature unleashed its fury. Jake risked a glance back, just in time to see Marco trip. Marco! Jake skidded to a stop, but the warlord was already moving. Marco looked up, wide-eyed, reaching for his rifle. He didn't stand a chance. The warlord's bladed cannon struck first, impaling him through the chest. No! Jake shouted, rage exploding inside him. Marco coughed, blood dripping from his lips, but he was already gone. The warlord tossed his body aside like a broken doll and turned its cold, black eyes toward Jake. Reyna grabbed Jake's arm. We can't stop. Move! Jake clenched his fists, his vision blurring with anger, but she was right. They couldn't fight this thing, not yet. He forced himself to turn away, even as Marco's body disappeared in the dust. They ran. The tunnels were close, if they could just make it. Another blast sent them sprawling. Jake hit the ground hard, his ears ringing, his vision spinning. He tried to push himself up, but his limbs felt sluggish. The warlord loomed above them, stepping closer. It raised its weapon. And then the sky erupted. A streak of fire tore through the night, slamming into the warlord with the force of a meteor. The creature roared in pain as the impact sent it staggering. Jake blinked, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Then, more streaks of fire, missiles, explosions ripped through the battlefield, forcing the warlord to retreat. Above them, cutting through the clouds, were sleek, heavily armed aircraft, human aircraft. And then, a voice over the comms, one that Jake hadn't heard in a long time. "This is Captain Adrian Locke of the UEDF, Earth Defense Fleet. Looks like you could use some air support." Jake's breath caught in his throat. They weren't alone. Humanity still had a fighting chance. Jake barely had time to process what was happening. One moment, he and Reyna had been running for their lives, and the next, the sky was raining fire on the Vakar. The warlord let out an ear-splitting screech as another missile slammed into its side, sending it stumbling backward. It wasn't dead, but it was hurt. Jake turned to Reyna, her wide eyes locked on the sleek, angular human aircraft streaking across the sky. He could hardly believe it. The Earth Defense Fleet was still alive. Monroe's voice crackled in their earpieces, his usual gruffness laced with something that almost sounded like relief. "Well, I'll be damned. We're not alone after all." Reyna tapped her earpiece, urgency returning to her voice. "Captain Locke, we thought the fleet was wiped out in the first wave." A slight chuckle came through the radio. "We let them think that. The Vakar hit our orbital stations hard, but they didn't get all of us. We regrouped in deep space, gathered survivors, and now we're back to return the favor." Jake felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Hope. "Where the hell do we sign up?" he asked, still breathless from running. Locke's voice was firm. "Get to the extraction point and we'll talk. We're setting up a command center, but we don't have much time. The Vakar won't let us keep the element of surprise for long." The warlord was recovering, its massive frame rising from the rubble, its armor scorched but intact. It let out a deep, guttural snarl as it raised its weapon again. Locke didn't hesitate. "Keep moving. We'll handle that thing." The aircraft swooped in low, releasing another barrage of missiles. The ground trembled as fire engulfed the battlefield once more. Jake grabbed Reyna's arm, pulling her toward the tunnels. They ran. The ruins blurred around them as they sprinted through the wreckage of the city, dodging fallen debris and smoldering metal. Behind them, the battle raged on. Humanity's counterattack had begun. They reached the tunnel entrance just as another explosion lit up the sky. Jake glanced back one last time. The warlord was still standing, but it was faltering. Maybe, just maybe, humanity had a shot at winning this war. They slid down into the underground, the scent of damp earth and rust filling their lungs. The moment they were inside, Monroe's voice came through again. "All right, listen up. Locke's people are setting up a rendezvous point about 10 miles from here. We need to move fast." Reyna nodded, already taking the lead. "Then let's not waste any time." Jake tightened his grip on his rifle and followed. The war wasn't over. But for the first time since the invasion began, it felt like humanity was no longer just surviving. It was fighting back, and it was winning. The tunnels stretched on, damp and suffocating, but Jake barely noticed. His mind was still racing. The Earth Defense Fleet was alive. Humanity wasn't alone. For the first time since the invasion began, there was a real chance to win this war. Reyna kept a fast pace, her eyes fixed ahead. The weight of what had just happened sat heavy between them. They had lost Marco. They had seen a Vakar warlord in action, and they had watched humanity strike back with a vengeance. No one spoke as they moved deeper into the underground. The only sound was the steady drip of water from the pipes above and the distant echoes of destruction from the surface. They had struck first, but the Vakar weren't done. They never would be. Monroe's voice finally cut through the silence. "All right, we're close. Locke's forces landed just outside the city ruins. We pop up, we link up, and we find out what the hell comes next." Jake exhaled, gripping his rifle. He had spent so long just trying to survive, scavenging, fighting, losing people every day. Now, he was about to stand in front of real soldiers again, humans who had spent months in deep space, planning, waiting for this moment. The tunnel sloped upward, leading to a rusted-out maintenance hatch. Reyna went first, prying it open and peeking out. The night air hit them, cool against their sweat-soaked skin. "All clear," she whispered. They climbed out one by one, emerging into the skeletal remains of what had once been a highway. The city skyline was broken, distant fires still burning from the earlier battle. But beyond the wreckage, just past the ruins, was something new. Ships. Human ships. Sleek, black Earth Defense Fleet dropships hovered above the ground, their engines humming low. Soldiers in advanced armor moved in coordinated formations, setting up portable command posts, heavy turrets, and communications relays. Jake barely breathed. They had air support. They had soldiers. They had a real goddamn army. And in the middle of it all, standing tall in a battle-worn officer's uniform, was Captain Adrian Locke. She was a legend, or at least she had been before the invasion. Stories about her had spread through the resistance like wildfire. A fleet commander who had refused to retreat when Earth fell, who had led survivors into deep space and sworn to return. And now she had. Locke turned as they approached, her sharp blue eyes scanning them. She was older than Jake had imagined, her face lined with exhaustion and battle scars, but her presence was commanding, undeniable. "You must be Vasquez," she said, nodding at Reyna. "And Carter." Jake gave a hesitant nod. "That's us." Locke glanced at the ragged group behind them. Dirty, wounded, exhausted, but still standing. "Hell of a job you pulled off. That depot strike hit them harder than you think." Reyna crossed her arms. "Then why do I get the feeling it's not enough?" Locke smirked. "Because it's not." She turned, motioning them toward a large holo table displaying real-time battlefield data. The Vakar fleet was still massive, still overwhelming. But there were weak spots now, cracks in their defenses. "We've been planning this counterattack for months," Locke said. "We knew we couldn't take Earth back without a coordinated strike. We've been waiting for the right moment." Jake frowned. "And you think this is it?" Locke's gaze hardened. "You just gave us that moment." She tapped the holo table, zooming in on a massive structure in the heart of the city, one that hadn't been there before the invasion. It pulsed with energy, a towering monolith unlike anything human-made. "That," Locke said, "is the Vakar control spire. Every major operation they run, communications, planetary defenses, fleet coordination, funnels through it." Jake felt his stomach tighten. "So we take that out?" "We cripple their entire war effort," Locke finished. Silence stretched between them. It was insane. The spire was deep in enemy territory, protected by thousands of Vakar troops, war machines, and, if the reports were right, more warlords. But if they could do it, if they could destroy that spire, humanity might actually have a chance. Reyna let out a slow breath. "All right, she said. "How do we bring it down?" Locke smiled grimly. "Glad you asked. The war wasn't over. But humanity had just found its endgame. The briefing room, or what passed for one in the makeshift command center, was a flurry of activity. Soldiers darted between stations, barking orders as holographic displays flickered with incoming data. Jake stood near the holo table, his arms crossed, trying to wrap his head around the sheer scale of what Locke was proposing. The control spire wasn't just a target. It was the Vakar's lifeline on Earth, a nerve center that tied their entire invasion together. Take it out, and their fleet would falter, their ground forces would lose cohesion, and humanity might, just might, claw its way back from the brink. Locke tapped the holotable again, pulling up a detailed scan of the spire. It was a jagged, alien structure, its surface rippling with energy conduits. Surrounding it were layers of defenses, anti-air turrets, patrol drones, and a small army of Vakar troops. At its base, the scans showed something even worse. Warlords, pacing like guard dogs. "This isn't a smash and grab," Locke said, her voice steady. "We hit this wrong, and we lose everything." Reyna leaned forward, studying the layout. "So, what's the plan?" Locke gestured to a section of the map. "We've got two angles of attack. First, my fleet takes the skies. We draw their air defenses out, thin their numbers, and keep their ships busy. Second, a ground team infiltrates the spire, plants charges at its core, and gets the hell out before it blows." Jake raised an eyebrow. "And I'm guessing we're the ground team?" Locke met his gaze. "You've been fighting in the dirt since this started. You know the terrain, the enemy. My people are trained for space combat. This is your turf." Monroe's voice crackled through the comms, joining the conversation remotely. "She's right. We've got the grit for this. Question is, can your fleet hold their own up there?" Locke's jaw tightened. "We'll hold. We've been retrofitting our ships with Vakar tech we salvaged in deep space. They won't know what hit them." Jake exhaled, running a hand through his hair. It was a hell of a gamble, splitting their forces between a sky battle and a ground assault. But they didn't have the luxury of playing it safe. "All right," he said. "What's the infill look like?" Locke zoomed in on a network of tunnels beneath the spire. "The Vakar didn't bother securing the old subway lines. They're too focused on the surface. You go in underground, bypass most of their defenses, and come up inside the spire's perimeter." Reyna smirked. "Sneaky. I like it." "There's a catch," Locke added. "Once you're inside, you'll be on your own. No air support, no backup. If you don't plant those charges and get out fast, you're not getting out at all." The room fell quiet. Jake glanced at Reyna, then at the handful of resistance fighters who had followed them here. They were battered, bruised, and running on fumes, but their eyes burned with the same fire he felt inside. "We've made it this far," Jake said. "No point stopping now." Locke nodded, a flicker of respect in her expression. "Good. You move out at dawn. My fleet will hit them at the same time. Give you the cover you need." She turned to her officers. "Get these people geared up. Weapons, explosives, whatever they need." As the soldiers scrambled to obey, Reyna pulled Jake aside. "You sure about this?" He gave her a tired grin. "You're the one who said we hit them harder, right?" She snorted. "Yeah, well, don't blame me when we're running from warlords again." "Wouldn't dream of it." The next few hours were a blur of preparation. The Earth Defense Fleet outfitted them with upgraded gear. Vakar plasma rifles with human modifications, lightweight armor, and enough explosives to level a small city. Jake hefted one of the rifles, feeling its weight. It was strange, holding something so alien yet so familiar. By the time dawn broke, they were ready. The sky above New York was a dull orange, streaked with smoke and the faint hum of Vakar ships. Locke's fleet was already moving into position, their engines roaring as they prepared to engage. Jake stood at the tunnel entrance with Reyna and the others. A dozen fighters, all that remained of their ragtag unit. The weight of the mission pressed down on him, but he shoved it aside. No time for doubt. Monroe's voice came through one last time. "Give 'em hell, Carter." "Always do," Jake replied. Reyna clapped him on the shoulder. "Let's finish this." They descended into the tunnels, the sound of distant explosions echoing above as Locke's fleet engaged the enemy. The war wasn't over yet, but it was about to be, one way or another.